it's a green wedding. So my point is that for someone who thought about that idea, compared to the regular wedding planner, they're able to charge a 30% markup cost because they can package this thing as a green wedding. In the same way, there's a growing demand for, green compliant products. And this can be a way to pitch to not just the banks, but even internally, that, hey, listen, we can open ourselves up to a new market just by ensuring that we're using resources efficiently, we are compliant with IEE, we are not emitting as much emissions. And like I said, a good example is the EU. This carbon border adjustment mechanism thing has come to stay. Like, we fought against it, we wrote all sorts, but it's come to stay. And you'll start seeing more carbon prices, more carbon taxes. If I have a crystal ball, not only in Europe, but you start seeing it in Asia as well. I know a lot of us do businesses with China. By the way, China is an interesting country. China has the fastest growing deployment of renewable energy at the moment in the world. But they are firing up more coal plants as well. For them, though, the challenge is with energy demand. My point is that China is moving at a fast pace in this space, and don't be surprised if tomorrow, to do business, with them, they will start charging a premium on green-related products or green inputs. So, all of that to say that there's growing demand for green supply chain, and that if our products meet those requirements, it's a great way for us to expand into new markets. And then the final thing, and I feel like this for me is one that you guys will find really, perhaps the most important, is, Olu, I've heard everything you said. Where do I go and get the money from? Where do I get cheap capital? And there are a lot of funds, and beyond grants, there are funds, there's BOI, there's all these banks coming up with new green products that you can go and access at a cheaper price. So World Bank, for example, has products, although they don't necessarily give direction to companies, they will do an on-lending facility. So they will take that money and probably give it to BOI, or they'll give it to development bank, or they will give it to even the banks. They're beginning to partner with commercial banks as well now. So we're beginning to see an increase in products. But even beyond Nigeria, we begin to see international funders that are coming up with new funding mechanisms, right? And you are able to access those funding mechanisms just by simply saying that we meet such and such and such requirements. By the way, please stop me at any point if you have questions, comments, just if you want to add to the conversation at all. Okay, I've touched on this slightly before. There are 3 ways to translate your RECP or IE project into business value. The first one, and I beg you, the first one is that you have to start framing this project as profitability project and not just environmental project. There's a company. You have 10 billion naira budget this year. The budget is limited. If you walk up to your boss and say that, renewable energy is good, emissions are not going to be a problem again, our atmosphere will be clean, environment will be clean, we'll have cleaner air, blah, blah, blah. So give me 3 billion out of that money. Let me use it to retrofit our electrical system. Because I just like the environment, and we should prioritize the environment. What you've said is not false, what you've said is important, but I promise you, if you were the CEO, chances that you will say no. Because for the CEO, they're thinking more about profits. They're thinking about expanding their business. But imagine that you flip that on the air, and you come to the CEO and you say to them, you see, I've noticed that we spend 30 million naira monthly on diesel. 30 million naira by 12, translates to 360 million naira. See, that 360 million naira though is a very, I promise you that we'll spend more than 360 million naira this year, because in Nigeria, we defy the law of gravity. So when prices go up, they don't come down. So most likely, based off what I'm noticing, maybe diesel prices might still go up. And so let's estimate that it's even going to be a good year. And so our diesel cost will be 400 million naira this year. But I found this solar project that we can do. I found this project that we can do. It costs 150 million naira. You can get financing from BOI at 10% and not 30% that we typically get financing for. I've looked at all the requirements. I think we meet the requirements. And so we'll be saving 250 million naira, but actually that's me being overestimating, because solar doesn't run every time of the, every day. So we might still be spending another 100 million naira on diesel. That comes up to 250 million naira. So in actual fact, our savings will be 150 million naira, and that 150 million naira you can deploy into, something else. Actually, maybe you can even pay us bonus using that 150 million naira. The CEO will look at you and say, that makes sense. At least it becomes a conversation starter, like, okay, that makes sense. But guess what? You've saved the environment that way. Guess what? You are environmentally compliant that way. But you didn't go to meet the CEO and talk about environmental compliance. Now, you might think that this is just fancy stuff. I was at a conference in New York last year, and one of the telecoms, like I think chief operating officer of a telecoms, of a major telecoms company in Nigeria was there. And on that global stage, the guy said, we were trying to do a materiality assessment, meaning that we looked at all the sustainability issues we have, and we wanted to rank them. And so we brought together all our stakeholders, our investors, our staff, our customers, everybody. And we said they should rank sustainability issues that we have in order of priority, and we want to land on the top 5. And he said, climate change it did not even come up. And then someone posed the question and said, well, hold on a second, you're from Nigeria, no? And he says, yes. And he says, but you're an oil-producing country. You're top 10 on the oil-producing countries. How is climate change not a big issue? Why are people not considering climate change? Well, I'll tell you why. As person we don't chop belly food, when they think about climate change. But it's not that we should not be thinking about climate change, because it's critical that we do. And I'll give you a reason why it's critical that we do in a second. It's that we continuously, and this is the challenge, and that's why people like ourselves are important at that global stage, is that we continually frame the issue as a climate change issue and not a productivity issue and not a financial issue. We frame it, but if you have people who haven't gone to schools, people who they don't have the food for the day, like, it's difficult to convince them that climate change is what they should be thinking about. And I think about this, why are you doing this climate change? Maybe people only need to be doing it so that I'll make more money. Then now they'll not be calling me for projects like this. Anyways, he's doing a project at the moment, and he's looking at the impact of flooding on students' performance. There are canals close to that school. Every time it floods, it so happens that most times the flooding season is during exam. In a sense, that's impacting students' performance in class. That's one example. How about we expand that out into companies that are in that area? Because there's lost productivity, there's lost revenue. And because there's lost revenue, there's reduced profitability. And because there's reduced profitability, maybe the company will wind up. And every year, these floods are not released. Every year, we hear about farmers and their farm getting wiped off by flood. Every year, the insurance companies are coming up with interesting products that when the flood now happens, they will say, oh no, this product, this insurance product does not really cover this type of flood that your insurance premium will go on. Until we start framing it as a productivity issue, as an economic issue, as a financial issue, we would think that it's because the developed world have gone ahead and industrialized. That's why they are thinking about climate change. The other issue with emissions, sadly, is that carbon emission is one of those things that it really doesn't matter where it's emitted, where the carbon is emitted. It's a global phenomenon. So even if you emit in the US, it doesn't mean that that CO2 will stay up there just in. Not because the environmental perspective is not important. In fact, that's a more important thing. It's because if we add all the money in the world and we don't need to go and meet anybody for money, we can call it an environmental issue and solve the issue and walk away. But because you need to go and meet providers of capital who have competing needs for that capital, you have to frame it in a way that will make them want to give you that money and not put it in FGN bonds. Right? Not only should you say that, hey, listen, we'll reduce our diesel usage. Here's the potential savings that we'll get from this. Remember what I did? I said, we spent 400 million naira on diesel. That was what I said. And then I took it a step further and said, well, there's this alternative that will cost us 150 million naira. Oh, well, it will actually cost us 250 million naira. But I did not stop there. It seems apparent, but I still went further to say that we will save 150 million naira. You see, the two things that finance people like to hear is savings and profit. If you cannot find the profit elements to this, find the savings elements to it. It's why I said it's intentional that we brought not just engineers in the room, but we also brought bankers. And we ensure that finance people are here as well, and even professors as they develop their curriculum in school. They start teaching, the students now in school, not just revenue minus operating expenses equals profit, but a way to holistically look at issues and say, well, it's not just the interest rate that will pay to the bank that is the cost of capital. There's an intangible cost that we keep bearing all the time that sooner or later will translate into financial costs. We've got to start teaching our students that today, so that as they become managers of business, they also can take that broad strategic view towards business management. The third one and the final one on the screen is consider the operational benefits. Remember what I said when I was using the flood example? Well, maybe we can't put money to the students that have failed their exams because of this. But imagine that we now create a flood park. What would happen is that teachers can get to their school in good time, students can get to school in good time, they're not sitting in flooded classes anymore, and that would increase, is expected to increase the performance of the students. When you're framing the RECP project beyond profitability, beyond quantifying the potential savings, you want to also state what operational benefits are there. We used to work from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. Now we can produce the same thing, but you can reduce the start time from 9 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m. Staff will now be more happy and will still keep the same level of productivity. So framing this beyond just money to potential savings to also operational benefits is the third piece of this puzzle in developing the business case. All right, so I created this project assessment framework, and those of us that were here before might have seen it, but I would want to walk through it again. And I see that there are a lot of people taking pictures. Don't worry, I think they will still share the slides later, maybe tomorrow or something. But I'd have to ask my CEO, but I think they'll send you the slides. I'm fine for them to send you the slides. I won't charge you money for it. Actually, maybe I should charge money for it. I was saying in Lagos that I like what consultants do, and because I'm a consultant. A consultant will come and meet you and say to you that I can help you solve your problem. The consultant, though, will charge you 500 million naira. Now, that problem, they can write the solution in 6 pages. But think about it. If I come to you and I collect 500 million naira from you, and what I bring back to you is 6 pages in a slide, you will say that I did not do any work. So what I'll do is that I'll bring a 100-page document to you with graphs and charts and tables, and some pages will be dense. And then in front, though, I will now put the 6 pages. I'll call it executive summary. And so that's 500 million. But what will happen actually is that you'll look at the 100 pages and say, where will we even start? Guess what you do? You now call me back, the consultant, to say, can you develop an implementation plan? How can we execute this 100-page document that you've given to us? Meanwhile, all the answer is in the first 6 pages. I'll say, well, you know, the 500 million naira that I charged, by the way, is not the only money I'll charge you. Because I will tell you when we are done that, well, listen, there's been cost overruns. Before you know the meaning of cost overruns, you would have paid the money. Say, oh yeah, the cost overruns, we had partner time, our partner spent more time on this engagement, and all of those, you know, because you guys couldn't exactly articulate what your problem was. This was what we thought the problem was before, but now, you know, when it came to us, we realized that there was scope creep. And because there's been scope creep, you know, we'll charge you a bit more money for cost overrun. Anyways, you call me back and say to me that, well, we need an implementation plan, and who better to implement this than the person who wrote the plan? I'll say, well, it's not a problem. I mean, we've worked on this together. I will not charge you more money this time. In fact, we'll give you a discounted price because we wrote the plan, we agree with you. And so what we will charge you this time around is just a token of 200 million naira. And so when I charge you that token of 200 million naira, I will now say to you that I promise you this time there will be no cost overruns because we've now fully understand and appreciate, you know, the scope of the work. But there are certain out-of-pocket expenses that you have to pay because, I mean, you know, we'll have to fly our consultants down, we'll have to put them in hotels, they'll be focused on this your work. So those things are out-of-pocket expenses. So this time, no more cost overruns. This time it's just out-of-pocket expenses. So ultimately, we'll still come back to that, you know, from 200 million. We say this out-of-pocket expenses this time around will not be a lot. It will just cost us about what? 25 million naira. All these things that I'm saying to you is that next time you need a consultant, me, I will not charge you up to 500 million. Maybe 450. All right. It's 50 million. That 50 million now, you can use it to buy diesel that is going up. All right, so this framework came up with it. And I intentionally, again, because I'm not one of the smartest people around, I like simple things. I like simple frameworks. I'm not like those consultants that I just described that will write many things. This framework now, we can make it 5 pages. Now we decided that we want to, you know, deploy an RECP project. We've decided that, you know, there's an issue. We've been convinced now that the environmental challenges, we want our production to be cleaner. In fact, there's been an RECP audit. How do we start? Where do we start from? The first thing obviously is that we've identified the gaps, right? Diesel cost is high, water usage is high, we don't recycle, we don't reuse stuff. We've come up with this list of gaps or a gap that we've identified. Obviously, the first decision is, do we want to do something about it or do we want to do nothing about it? And I promise you, doing nothing about it is also an option because it might just not be priority at the moment, you might not have access to capital today, we might have other competing priorities and competing needs, right? And so we can either decide to do something or do nothing. If we decide to do something though, what's the next thing that we should do? I find that most times we want to find the most technical solution to a problem when there are a range of solutions to a problem. And so what we should do is to initially list out what I've called a solution set, which simply is the list of possible solutions. I'll give you an example. We're saying that we're using too much energy. One solution, you know what, we'll start switching up the light in areas where we're not using it. It sounds like, come on now, that cannot be a solution, but please include it in the list of your solution set. And then go from something as basic as that to something as complicated as, in fact, we'll deploy a geothermal plant. Just list all the solutions down. The other important thing is that you should engage stakeholders. And I've been trying to allude to it throughout the session, is that what I've found is that when there's a technical problem, the only people that sit at the table when they're trying to solve the problem are the technical people. Forgetting that after you've drawn up that technical solution, that fancy, you've drawn everything, you will still have to go and meet Mr. Finance to give you and so someone was sharing this in Lagos that they went for a training as engineers, and only for them to get there and everything they were talking about was finance. And they felt like, oh no, sorry guys, we feel like we're in the wrong training. And people said, no, we know this is the right training. Every time an engineer comes up with a solution, they never come to you and say, here's the solution that we've identified, this is what it would cost, here's the return or the savings that we'll get from it. They'll just say, there's this new technology, we think it will solve our problem. The person that wants to deploy capital, though, can't be bothered about this fancy technology you're talking about if the technology does not translate to savings or profitability. So as you are drawing up your solution set, ensure that you're engaging all the necessary stakeholders as required and as at when due. So now you've identified your solution set, you engage your stakeholders. The next thing to do is to do both a quantitative and a qualitative assessment of each solution. And I'll explain this using an example. Most times when we are doing an assessment of our solution, we'll say one costs 10 million, the other costs 15 million. Clearly, the one that is 10 million is the cheaper option. But sometimes you forget that this one that is 10 million naira and is the cheaper option. For example, we have to go and bring it from the north. We'll send our staff to be on the road and go to the north to go and get this thing. But sadly, this is an area, or this particular area where you want to go and source the thing from, is an area with heightened security risk. And so, you are forgetting that part of the cost is the potential cost of human lives that you will put on the road to go and source the product. And so every time you do your quantitative analysis, ensure that there's a bit of qualitative analysis too that goes into it. And that's why it is critical that you engage a lot of stakeholders. Because while the technical person can look at it from a technical perspective, the finance person might look at it from purely a finance perspective, the project management person can think about it from a timing perspective, the CEO might think about it from a strategic perspective, and when you put all of those things together, it becomes a full package. And so please, every time you're assessing any solution, someone gave a fantastic example, like sometimes we think that just changing bulbs is cheap. How about the disposal cost of the ones you are removing from there? Like, we don't think about those things. A finance person, for example, might not think about that. They might just say, how much does the new bulb cost? 2 million naira. Okay, we have 3 million naira and signs. But then you now come back and say, Mr. Oga, the bulbs that are here now, we have to dispose them. And there's a way for us to dispose them. And that will cost another 500,000 naira. And you know what Mr. Finance will say to you? They will say it is outside budget. It does not enter budget this year. You now put that bulb and put it in one side. The environmental people will now come and see it and say that you are not compliant. And so that 500K you did not want to spend before to dispose with him, guess what? They will give you a fine of 1 million and they will still say, go and dispose it with 500K. But no, in Nigeria, prices does not follow the law of gravity. Whatever goes up continues to go. So that 500K that you're supposed to use to dispose it will not be 500K again. It will be 750,000. But guess what? We could have solved it if both the technical people and the finance people and the project manager and everybody were in the room when we were making the decision. All right, so after we've done the quantitative and qualitative assessment, we then move into ranking the solution, which is the most feasible, which one. And sometimes, the reason why I say you should list out all the solutions is because never think that sustainability or RECP/IE is an end in and of itself. It's a continuous journey. 20 years ago, 30, 25 years ago, nobody thought about wind as a commercially viable solution to renewable energy sources. In fact, we used to think that solar would never be scaled. Solar was too expensive. Well, guess what? We've got solar today, and we've got wind today. And then geothermal is the one we're talking about today, and we're saying, well, you just need it in specific areas that you can do geothermal, because that's the places where the geographical makeup of those lands allow you to do geothermal energy, to source geothermal energy. Well, because of fracking in the US, they've realized that they can apply the fracking technology across most places, and so you don't need a certain type of geographical formation to get geothermal energy. My point is, don't be surprised if in 10 years, this solar is not what we'll be hearing again. It will suddenly be maybe geothermal. Before, we said nuclear was the way to go, and then Hiroshima happened, and we said no more nuclear. Now, we're getting more nuclear plants being considered to be either required or nuclear plants are now being installed. My point is that the reason why I've said you should list all the solutions is that sometimes you would say, you know what, we will start by changing bulbs, but after that, here's what we will do. After that, here's what we will do. And so don't just simply say, what we'll do is solar. List out the solutions and then start considering what are the little things we can change at least today. If you've got the capital to do the most expensive thing, that's all well and good. If you don't, list out the solutions and start thinking about which you start. Anyway, the next thing, where would we find the money to? We've decided what solution we want to deploy. Where would we find the money? Do we want to look for the money from an internal source, or do we want to look for the money from an external source? If it's internal, maybe we had a lot of profits this year, and we said, well, rather than paying out dividend, maybe we'll just use the pool of capital that we have internally to solve this issue. Or maybe we'll go externally. But even if we're going externally, are we going to borrow money? Are we going to do equity, meaning that are we going to say the owners of the business should inject more capital to solve this problem? Are we going to use both debt and equity? Are we going to use both internal and external funding? So the problem is a 50 million naira problem. We have 20 million naira internally that we can use, so it's only 30 million naira that we'll go and borrow. And after you've done all of those, what that translates to is that you've now made a business case. Please stop me again if you have any questions. Now, this is one of those things that I said to you that consultants, you see that it's the same slide. I just put one dotted thing around that place and put opportunity metrics there. This is how you get to 100 slides. All right. What this is saying is that inside that box, the most important part of this framework isn't necessarily the part of finding money. The finding money part is the end part. The part for deciding what the business case actually is this place of what's the solution? which stakeholders should we engage? What are the quantitative and qualitative assessments? And then ranking our solution. That really right there is what I've been termed the opportunity metrics. Again, we like to use big words. That right there is the core of the work of deciding what will we do, how will we do it, which one would we ultimately go forward with. So how do we practicalize that? Forget all the theory we've been talking about. What's the practical application of this? With the opportunity matrix, what you want to do is to think about three things as you start ranking. As you look at your solution set and you start ranking, you want to think about three things. Number one is, how much does this thing cost? Number two, what's the impact of this thing? Number three, how easy is it for us to implement it? So what I've put on the board, for example, are a few RCP measures, and you can relate with this. If I say, let us replace incandescent bulbs with LED, in my mind, that sounds like something that isn't too expensive to do. Impact on efficiency, well, now would have better energy efficiency. And if energy efficiency is important to us, maybe the priority is high. But there are other things that might be really expensive to do. For example, installing waste heat recovery units. Sounds like something fancy, sounds like something that will be expensive. What's the impact on efficiency? Well, if this is a heat recovery system, well, maybe there will be energy efficiency. But maybe the priority today is medium. Why? Because we can't afford it. Right? So these are the ways to be thinking when I say that rank the issues or rank the solutions. This is the way to start thinking about it. Or this is one way to think about it. How much does it cost? What's the impact on what we want it to have? What's the priority? And by priority, how is it priority? How easy is it for us to implement this? Now, I've been talking a lot and people have just been looking at me. What we will do now is that this thing I just taught you, we will now implement it. On the board, we have a mid-sized bottling company. I shall take that to Onitsha. There's this bottling company that has identified all these RCP measures. In our individual table groups, what I want us to do is to assess how much it will cost, what's the impact and ease of implementation, and then rank these four things. Do you understand? Do we understand? Remember on this page, I said that there are three ways to consider RCP solutions or IE solutions. You want to think about how much it costs, what's the impact on whatever project it is that you're doing or your strategy, and how easy is it for you to implement it. So I've said that this class is going to be practical. This is not one of those classes where we just be talking theory. We want to be sure that people are understanding what we're doing. And so I've said that we want to look at this mid-sized bottling company. They sell juice. And this company has done an RCP audit, and then they've come up with a number of RCP/IE measures. And so what I want you to do in your table groups, not do individually, in your table groups, is to try to apply that ranking system to this. For example, do I think LED retrofit will be expensive? How easy is it to implement? And what impact do I think it will have on energy efficiency, for example? So which do you think will be most expensive? Which one do you think will be the most easy to implement? etc. I'm going to give us 10 minutes in our table groups to do it now. Things you've not thought of before, somebody will share.
We didn't agree on everything straight up because some believe they are not high cost activity, whereas the others believe it is high cost. We have to reanalyze again. Some of them looked capital intensive, whereas some of them are daily running cost activities. So those helped us. But by the time we argued and analyzed again, we observed that it could either be higher than we thought or low. So it helped us to think and argue and then come to a conclusion.
Okay, so one follow-on question. So are you what part of the business are you in? Are you
Chartered accountant.
Yes, you're a finance person, great. What part of the business are you in?
Quality assurance analysis.
Quality assurance, great. What part of the business are you in?
Accountant.
Accountant. Not the exact mix I want, but still great. In fact, what would happen is that the more the stakeholders you have at the table, the more the back and forth will be. So even though I have said you want to engage stakeholders, it's also important to note what part of the process to engage what stakeholders. Else, what I've found is sometimes there will be too many cooks in the kitchen, right? But you will also want to ensure that you brought along everybody on the journey, but you identify the appropriate part of that journey that you want to bring them along on. Because what would happen is that if you don't bring them along on the journey, they would say to you that it is your plan. And so you cannot come at the end of the day to say that this is what we want to do, and this is your own part in it, when you did not carry us along from the beginning. All right, so now let's go to solving the exercise. And there's this table that they are so smart. When I ask them, do you understand what we are doing? They just say it to me, pa, 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 pa. So, this is my oga here. This table is the table we will start with. Can you tell us what your result is? But beyond the result, because this isn't just about the result, it's, what did you guys see? So, for example, when we start with LEDs, how did you guys think about it? And what made you land on the ultimate decision that you landed on? Anybody on the table can volunteer.
Okay, so this table comprises of financial persons, marketing persons, correct, admin and accounting persons.
This is the perfect table. My spirit was just saying to me that.
Okay, so after brainstorming, we are now using a case.
Sorry, can we all hear what he's saying?
So after brainstorming, we're now using case studies of for the electricity one.
Sorry, 1 hour, please.
So we agreed on electricity bulbs.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Right? Paul. All right.
So after brainstorming, we agreed to use a case studies of electricity bulbs, for instance, for the LED packaging. So what we agreed on is the cost of, say for instance, replacing the entire power bulbs that are consuming high rate of power will be high if we're replacing them with power saving or LED bulbs. So we agreed that...
I'm coming to this stage. Don't worry. Don't listen to what Oga Paul is saying.
Okay, so we agreed that the cost will be high, and then the impact. We also agreed that the impact will also be high on the long run. So eventually, the company will reduce cost of payment of electricity bill, for instance. Will reduce cost of diesel or fuel they use to power the bulbs, and then production will move smoothly. Implementation, the impact, we agreed that the ease of implementation will be easy. Get a technical person to just change the entire bulbs. But you also raised a concern. What happens to the old bulbs within the organization? Are they going to be, what technical arrangement will be in place to dispose of those old ones? So that's something that the company would need to agree on.
So for you think that LED retrofits in the packaging area will be expensive? You think the impact on energy efficiency? You also even spoke about the disposal of the old bulbs. Okay, let's look at another table. This table looks like they are still working. And so I'm sure that what they are doing must be very thorough. They are pushing it, they're like, I can present. Sharp people. I like this, my bros. I mean, whatever you are comfortable doing, if you want to stand like me, facilitator, that's fine.
I understand.
Okay.
So,
and please face like, let them hear what you're saying.
agreeing on our decision wasn't easy as well. Because
Did you guys fight each other?
friendly fights,
Okay.
kind of, because I'm in the engineering department.
Hey, I've been looking for a table with an engineer. Okay.
In the quality control.
Quality control. Oh, perfect.
So, like, we brought in our own ideas concerning the problem. So, like these LED retrofits, first of all, we need to understand what you are dealing with. So, retrofitting is just like replacing a system with the new ones. So, for us, we think that for you to change an entire system of something that has been there, the cost will be high.
Okay.
Cost will be high.
Don't forget, this is just in the packaging area. Sure.
Okay.
No, that's fine. No, go on.
The cost will be high.
Planning to throw you off.
So, but the impact at the long run to save a lot of money.
Yeah.
It will save a lot. So the impact is very high. It save a lot of money. Then the ease of implementation is also high.
We'll take one more table. Thank you. A round of applause, actually. And a round of applause for Paul as well. All right. I will say that because it's just packaging area, it will not be expensive, right? Okay. Do you know the size of the packaging area? Great. So it's a mid-sized factory. Do you know what a mid-sized company is?
No, sorry. We are looking at
Guys, sorry,
life cycle analysis, which you have to put into consideration. For example, if the high energy impact bulb can take 5 years, and you calculate the number of wattage it will consume compared to the retrofit of energy saving bulb, you look at statistics. At the long run, you discover that the initial one that is there is more expensive to the retrofit of low energy bulb. At the initial, you will assume that the cost implication is high, but you shouldn't look at only the cost implication at the initial stage. The life cycle analysis has to be put into consideration. That is why sometimes we look at the implementation of solar. When you want to deploy solar energy, at the initial stage is expensive. But look at the life cycle analysis of it and compare it to diesel engine. You discover that it's more saving in terms of cost implication. That's why we're saying, some argued that deal is expensive. Yes, at the initial, you consider the life cycle. That is a point you must consider. For management cycle, we do not look at initial cost. The overall cost and its impact to the profitability and sustainability of the sector or the production section is paramount. That is what we consider. And we also consider ease of implementation. What does it take to retrofit? Does it take a lot of time? No, when it comes to retrofit. Compared to the last one that has to do with, let me say, pressurized. Those are capital intensive change of one section of a system to another, maybe from diesel to gas fire. When you compare, you know that the first is easy to implement, and it's easy and it's impact too, because when you look at the impact section on that, you observe that yes, the former one have maybe a brighter outlook as it's here, it consumes more. But the LD, there are some durable ones in terms of longevity. And also, there are some that are more brighter in nature, depend on the watt. So, in all, the system analyst, the industrial engineer who look at optimization, and also the management will put cost, durability, and sustainability into it, and then make their informed decision.
But I actually, please, a round of applause. I think beyond landing on whether it will be cheap or not, there were certain things that you said that I think are really important. So it would help us decide, whether something will be expensive, something will be cheap. On the face of it, for example, you can decide that LEDs are cheap because of the cost that it is today. But then when you do your life cycle assessment, you can decide that something else is expensive. I think the point here of the exercise is that sometimes we typically think that cost is limited to just finances. That's on the one hand. Number two, sometimes we think that it's just a technical team that is needed at a table like this. What this exercise is expected to bring out, you notice that by the time I go to the answers, it doesn't even go the whether it's expensive or cheap direction. and I'll put up the illustrative answer in a second, it really gets at what did the audit team say about this particular RECP measure? How are we thinking about this other one relative to that other one? And so the point really for the exercise is that do not think that when we say you should rank solutions, it will be an easy conversation. In the same class, with the same exercise, with engineers on certain tables saying it will be expensive, engineers on another table saying it will be cheap, this is the nature of the conversations you would have when you're trying to build a business case. I think that's what, if there's anything you should take away, don't walk out of here thinking that it will be an easy conversation to have. But as long as it's a healthy debate, as long as, and that's why ultimately you should tie it back to the organization's strategy. Are we prioritizing energy today, for example? If it is energy usage we are prioritizing, if there's any solution on there, for example, that relates to water, even though water usage might be important, if it does not tie back to what we have prioritized, at least from a strategic perspective, maybe it's cheap, maybe it's easy to implement, but we may not still prioritize it. So the point ultimately is that when you have a list of measures that you've landed on ultimately, ensure that you engage enough people, because while someone might think about it now, another person might think about the life cycle, another person might think about quality control, another person, and the list goes on, to help us make a rich and informed decision. All right, focus on what this says. So this says, well, if it's LED retrofit, to your point, it's easy to implement, it's low cost. Another person says, well, this compressed air system leak, we think that it was audit team that identified that there's an audit, we did an RECP audit and there was a leakage, and that's how we identified that. We think that by fixing it, will save energy. Another person says, well, this heat recovery thing, it's feasible, but it will come with high upfront investment. Another person says, well, switching from diesel to gas-fired plants will save fuel, but you'll have to convert the energy system. And so most likely, that will be not easy to implement, that will take time, and that will be costly, right? So that's the way to think about all of this. The one thing that I will say though is, when you say it's going to be costly or it's expensive, did I put up any price? Even though we did not put, how did you decide that it was going to be costly, even though I did not put up any price on this one?
Well, it's based on available information on the solution process.
Exactly. So someone thinks about it and says, even though we don't have any number on the screen, I think that I know what an LED would cost, as someone said, relative to what a solar power, solar energy would cost. But, management would say, I hear you, but show me. And so, in the act, when you want to do it at your business, intuition is great, but don't be surprised if you are blindsided by certain things. And so going to get the actual cost, digging into the research itself to know what the numbers say is important. Because like we have established earlier, there are certain aiding costs that we may not have considered. For example, disposal costs. For example, restoration of the environment costs. Those costs like that, construction costs, things like that we might not have considered just based on the fact that, well, I know what a diesel-powered engine costs relative to what such and such cost, right? So even though we haven't put up any cost on the board, and it's great that we're using experience and we're using intuition, ultimately we want to ensure that we go and look at the numbers. Like when my accountant right there, we're going to do the debit and the credit, and we see whether the budget balance. All right.
But there are still tools available to assist, such as levelized cost of energy, a technique in determining the various function each of these sections to achieve your goal.
All right. So what he's saying is that there are tools you can adopt. So he threw up a fancy word at me. Thankfully, even though I'm not too smart, I know that thing that he's talking about. There's something called levelized cost of energy, LCOE is what it's called. It's a tool that is used to assess different energy systems to see, sometimes it's to help rank which is more expensive and which is cheapest. So usually, for example, you want to do LCOE, or you want to calculate the LCOE, for example, of coal plants versus versus maybe a solar plant. This is a tool that is used globally. It does have its demerit. One demerit, for example, is that LCOE does not necessarily consider the stage of the capital deployment. So with solar, it's upfront cost. The money might look like a lot upfront, but the recurring and operational cost over the lifetime is almost negligible. But LCOE doesn't factor the timing of capital spend. It just says what's the total cost over the life of the energy system, and compares it against another energy system. And if one is higher, it says this is too expensive, let's go for the other one. So thanks for using the jargon in the class, but thankfully, I know what you were getting at.
Your assessment impacts, understand, in mid-size and juice bottling plants, then you realize that the impact of converting or switching from diesel to gas-fired boiler is high, as in the impact of the company, understand, is high profitably compared to the lead. Because the lead is just a light, but the gas from diesel to gas, you understand, we impact the company positively, and we save a lot of finance in the long run compared to an ordinary lead.
What's your name, sir?
Michael.
Michael. For someone that is smarter than me, like you, to raise the point, but you, people like you, I came ready for you. All right, he raised an important point, and the point he raised is, but Olu, listen, you said that we should check cost, impact, and ease of implementation. This illustrative answer that you put on the board doesn't consider impact. And then he started making his case for why he thinks, yeah, maybe something will be expensive, but if you look at the ultimate impact from an energy savings perspective, that thing is, that thing then perhaps should consider it and not say, well, from a cost perspective, this is expensive, but from an impact perspective, maybe it has a lot more impact. Two things. Number one, before I put up the answer, I said that the answer I'll be putting up doesn't consider cost, does not consider it in the way that I've said you should consider it, because what I wanted you to do, what I wanted to assess with this, or what I wanted to prove is this, is that when you have many people at the table, there will be conversations, there will be pushbacks, there will be you challenge yourself. That's one. Number two, I also said that I would show you certain things like, oh, it's technically feasible, but I never put that up. That's because the next session we are going to, which is something called a 2x2 matrix, focuses on impact. And so I was ultimately going to come to impact. I knew that, my great friends like yourself will talk about impact. But as you can see, it's the same examples on that other page. It's just a slightly different framework here. And so you said that this will be high impact, high cost. Oh, wow, it's there. All right. So the other framework that I have, and I personally like this the most, is something called a cost impact matrix, a 2x2 matrix. Because some people would say that, well, it's difficult to determine ease of implementation or not, it's difficult to, and I've said, well, how about we draw a 2x2 matrix? Because when you do it in a tabular format like this, it might be difficult for us to truly quickly assess where things fall. But if you draw a 2x2 matrix like this, it's easy to compare two things at a time. So you can do high impact, low impact, high cost, low cost. In fact, you can do high impact, low impact, high ease of implementation, low ease of implementation. The point is 2x2 matrix like this help you to fit in all the solutions that you've identified and measure it across two different. So the illustrative answer, for example, for that one for the exercise we just did, says, well, this is a packaging area. we think it's a mid-sized bottling company. So we would assume that the packaging area is not the production area, which may be bigger. It's not the entire area of the company. So if it's just LED retrofit in the packaging area, it will be low cost, but maybe it's also low impact relative to the entire size of the bottling company. We said, well, the compressed air leaks, it will be high cost, high impact, I beg your pardon, but because it was audits, and that's why I included that audit thing, it was audits that identified a specific place where we're having leaks, it might be easy to just fix the leak. And that's why I said it's low cost, but then it will be high impact. For the other two, they're super expensive, but then they would also have a high impact. My point is this tool is another tool that you can use where you can draw a 2x2 matrix. We have all our solutions now, that maybe 5, 6, 7 of them. We can just draw a 2x2 matrix, put high impact, low impact, high cost, low cost, and try to map them out. And I promise you, there will be a lot of arguing and back and forth and banter as well.
Can I ask one more question? Okay. You said that the compressed air, for instance, was discovered by audit, and then for that reason you assume, okay, you say that it can be fixed exactly, and then it's low cost.
I assume.
Okay, yeah. Did you also factor the cost of the audit? Because let me use a company for instance. Most of us here, you will get a consultant, right? And that consultant will charge you up to like maybe 10, 15, 20 million, right? To look for something, a fault or get non-conformities in your company. Now, is that cost not also factored in this thing you're doing? Because I feel that if it is factored, then that compressed air should not also be considered as low cost. You want to consider the cost of audit also.
Again, I like people like Michael. And I came prepared for people like Michael. I came prepared for people like you. There are two ways I can even come at this. I'm not too smart, but I can be smart about this to say that my Oga there is going to give us free RECP audit for certain companies. So I already assumed that that audit is free. And as such, I'm not going to consider the cost of that audit because it's free. You're not going to pay for it. But more importantly, because this is an illustrative session, what we've done is to say that here are the items that we have now identified. So we're doing this assessment post issue identification. We've identified the issues now, or the solutions now. Which one will be costly, which one will be cheap. We're not saying what happened before we identified the issues. We're saying, yeah, because someone can say it was audit 2 that reviewed the LED. Why did we target packaging room? Maybe it was audit that said it's the packaging room that we leave lights on for the most part. We did not include the cost of how we identified that particular thing. We're saying, here's a set of solutions or solutions that we've identified. Let's quickly rank them, which is high cost, which is low cost. The final thing I should mention, I'm sorry sir, I'll let you say something, is that one of the things I always avoid in classes like this is to try to say that this is the absolutely right answer. That's not the point. The point is, and that's what I've been trying to make since morning, that the point really is that something that I might consider even cheap, right? Another company, given their budgetary constraints, might consider it expensive. The point of the exercise is that you've got to consider cost, you've got to consider impact, and you've got to consider ease of implementation.